Um, I'm really excited about this. I think we're all really excited about this. For everyone in the crowd who has joined us, we're going to spend some time just kind of chit chatting and shooting shit really here. But please feel free to jump in, ask questions, commiserate with us. This is not entirely meant to be us just like bitching, but a little bit of us bitching with some solution orientation here to like how we think we could do this better. So with that, let me introduce some folks. The first one, I'm going to call your name and then you can kind of introduce who you are and where you're from. So on my list, Jen is first.
Hi everyone. Jen Lurch, out just very briefly. So I'm at Justice System Partners with Shannon, and I've also had the pleasure of working with Amy and Kim and several other folks on here. So great to be here.
Great. And Jen, like me, is a research associate at Justice System Partners, which we're going to consider kind of in this nonprofit space. So all of us are kind of representing different spaces of sorts, and recently was on the market within the last year. And then Kim.
Yeah, thanks Shannon for putting this together. My name is Kim Crass and I'm an assistant professor at San Diego State University, and I was most recently on the job market 2 years ago, so that's fresh, as well as I got to be a postdoc and have fun with Jen, Shannon, and Amy. And so that was a lot of fun too. And so I'm excited to talk some shit.
Yeah, I love that. Some other things to note about Kim. Kim's, I feel like has kind of been almost on like several markets, right? Because I got offers from places like Pew, but ultimately went academic, and then went to UMass Lowell, and then went back on the market to go to transfer to San Diego State. And we're going to talk a little bit about some shit about that process that no one's really talking about either. And so I think that's really important. Amy, you're next on my list.
Hey everyone, I'm Amy December. Let's see. So I work for Carnevale Associates, which is a small kind of consulting research firm. So I specifically work on a federal contract as a kind of subject matter expert, is what the federal feds like to say about us. So I can talk about that space a bit. And I also was very recently on the job market. I defended my dissertation in April, graduated in May, and accepted the job that I currently have in February leading up to that. So I was kind of on the job market last fall into the early spring. So I can talk about that experience too.
Totally. And then of course, my faithful partner in crime, Kate. You want to introduce yourself to folks who might be new here?
Hey everybody, my name is Kate Kempany. I am currently the research scientist and research operations manager for the Oregon Department of Corrections, working my dream job, having so much fun on a daily basis. I've spent most of my time post-PhD at either state, where I am now, or county, so kind of local, embedded in agencies, so basically as a government employee. So really happy to talk about all the things I didn't know about being on this job market, and even all the things that I'm still kind of learning now as I'm putting recruitments out for folks to join our team and things of that nature. So again, thank you, Shannon, for putting this together. And yes, very happy to have this conversation today. Thanks for everybody joining us.
Yeah, for sure. So I think with Kate too is really important, was on the market for, earlier in the process. So probably of us, maybe we'll end Kate or Kim employed first, so to speak, but was first employed by Multnomah County, like she said, and then took a new job within the last year and a half, I feel like it's been.
Yeah, that was June 2018. June 2020, excuse me. I transitioned to DOC. And that was a different job market experience where it was more of a recruitment, which is different than, applying for a position. Again, learning different things about the process all along.
Totally. So, so for the folks at home, I'm Shannon Magnuson, and I'm usually the person who's bombarding your emails with a couple of things, usually talking about the series, but also talking about, Kate and I take turns, but mostly pushing out all of the job postings. And so there's lots of different posting that we put out. And the goal today is to really just talk about the market generally. We've kind of organized our chat of sorts of the things that are kind of like our soapbox issues that we kind of wish we knew, and kind of in 3 different parts, which is kind of like shit that we should be talking about as it relates to lifestyle, kind of shit we should be talking about as it relates to like money, that we're not necessarily saying but should be saying, the shit that kind of is about the hard to handle situations, particularly when it comes to being on the market, whether those are awkward situations or just like how to handle things, and the last one is just kind of like navigating it all, and kind of the stuff that we've been griping about separately but didn't really fit neatly in those other squares. And so, this is kind of a free for all as we're all talking. But as it relates to thinking about like the things that people are not talking about when you start the process, right? Generally speaking, I'd say that, folks are either typically going to a university setting, and all of this stuff also applies if you're most of it, I think, applies if you're going to university settings too, right? But if you're going to a typical university setting or a AltAc space, maybe a little bit less in the AltAc space, there is a real, and maybe this is perceived, a real push to push you someplace that is prestigious, well known, and that makes your mentor look good. Do we think that that's true? Am I making that up?
Shannon, I think you're on point about a lot of those things. And I will say, and this is just me speaking personally, I don't know it's always that will make your mentor look good, but the other parts for sure, like we hold prestige. Obviously, most of us be like, oh, you work for where? That's awesome. And, we have ideas about that. So, I think that's a very human thing, but unfortunately, it becomes exceptionally tangible and stressful and pressure filled when it comes time to go on the market. So I think talking about it and talking about why we care about these prestigious places and if we should is so important.
Yeah, so agreed. So, and I think particularly as someone we've all been on the alt-app market at some point in time, although Kim has taken a university job, that there is some perceived or actual, there is some black sheeping that happens when you decide to take an AltAc position. Does anyone kind of want to talk a little bit about maybe their experience there, about what that feels like or looks like, and how to be prepared for that?
I was going to say both in that terms and piggybacking on what Kim said. I know I felt that a lot. I don't know if this is unique to George Mason, since there was a huge push in our department to become ultra prestigious and be placing people at R1s and whatever. But I felt this pressure, especially as I got to the tail end of my dissertation, where faculty that I hardly even worked with would stop me in the halls and be like, what are you doing next? You would be an amazing professor. Have you looked at the job market? Like, I'll do this. I'll come to my office. I'll talk to you. And I think they were well-meaning for sure. I don't think that they were like, this is just for me and my own benefit so that we can claim you when you go off on your own. I do think they were earnest in saying that they thought I could exceed and do well in a position like that. But it wasn't really ever a question of like, what do you want to do? Is that what you want to do? Or is there something else? And even my mentor, who was fairly good about it, didn't ever pressure me to go a certain direction. When it became more and more clear that I wasn't going to apply to academic jobs, it just didn't become as much of a conversation between us anymore. Like when there was this like small sliver where I was considering it and looking at jobs and talking with her about advice, she was like all in. Like every time we talked, she checked in, she asked how I was doing, asked if I wanted help. But as soon as it was like, okay, clearly I'm not applying, the academic job time frame has passed, it was just then, how's things going? How are things? And that can be challenging. It's just feeling like you don't get the same support, whether, again, she meant it that way or not. You are talking to people who have chosen as your mentor, chosen the academic profession as the one that's right for them. And so it's harder to find that voice or mentorship in first a different direction. I felt that way at least. And so that's when I really turned to peers and other people who had navigated it before me to kind of talk through, like, how do I change the way I'm talking about my experience? Because clearly people in job interviews aren't getting it. Or how do I redo this massive CV that I was just drilled into making a 12-page document into a 3 or 4 page? You know, it's like, you have to start finding those resources somewhere to help you navigate. And it's, again, no fault to the professors and mentors out there. It's just, obviously they've chosen that path. So it's harder to get the advice to choose a different path from people who didn't choose that path and don't want that path.
So, and I will say, I got to see both perspectives, because I will say, I feel like I definitely got a little bit, I found a home with a mentor who was much more supportive of asking the question of what do you want to do. Also probably helped. I was clear from the jump. I was not going into academics. Like, that was just not happening. And so there was, although I did recognize that pretty much not a lot of people were interested in helping fund my education or continuing on once that was made clear beyond where I ended up. And so to that point, I will say my experience has been, if you're looking for a mentor, particularly in a professor role, I have found that those who have been in both positions, right? If you look at their resumes, if you look at what their experience and even somewhat of what their current research agenda, if they're more like action research or who they're partnering with on their projects, it may show more of an appreciation for multiple places and ways to do research, that they may be more accepting and more available to give kind of a more well-rounded perspective or feedback as to like going into different places.
Kim, yeah.
I was just saying, Jen, you'd like completely said everything I was going to say about the fact that, to Amy's point before, anecdotally, I don't think a lot of professors have had practical experience in this other arena, in this AltAc space. And so I also believe is probably intimidating. It's also unknown, like it's navigating a business world. You know, how do you turn your 12-page CV into a 1-page thing and really capture everything you've done and position yourself? And we're not trained to do that. And so I think like Jen said, is there are parts of our discipline that really, this fits in really well. So, I mean, I feel like Jen and I and Amy and Shannon all had the similar supervisors who were doing this type of work, and that was awesome. But there's other parts of our discipline that just don't fit that well in that space. And so it makes jumping that hurdle even harder, I think. So that's why I'm really glad that we're kind of airing this set of grievances, because we have to be able to talk about it.
I love that. I was like, yeah, airing the grievances. I mean, Jen, I think you offered a really thoughtful suggestion of looking at people's CVs, looking at the work they're doing, even if they're doing it in university settings, and that they might be more apt to helping you navigate, either because they appreciate it or because they just understand the resources and kind of how it works. I think that's a super, super thoughtful suggestion. I like Amy, and I think calling that shit out, that like when you start saying, hey, I want to go AltAc, like opportunities do get close to you. Like for me, a lot of it was about writing, and I had to fight for myself a lot to say, you should be mentoring me just as much as you're mentoring other people about writing, because writing means something differently over here. Doesn't mean it's still not important to my growth as a scholar and thinker. And those doors started getting closed, or maybe just like, not necessarily shut, but definitely like, well, I don't need to give you that much attention anymore in these ways. And that was also hard to cope with, right? Like I'm a fairly motivated human being who's trying to do all the things, and to not feel supported or feel like these other students who are willing to go R1s are getting more support. Like that's shitty. I don't know how else to say it, but it's shitty. And also to Amy's point, right? Like I also had to turn to Kim, I feel like, as part of my negotiations, and turn to other people and eventually just tell my mentor like, hey, yeah, I got the job. And they weren't actually part of the process where where if you're moving through an R1 space or even moving through a university space, generally your academic mentor is usually more part of that process, as opposed to in this space in particular, really doing that alone and like feeling a little lonely about that. But the other thing that I think is important for either going into an AltAc space or going to a university space is like totally disrupting the idea that you need to go someplace prestigious. And I want us to talk about that because I think that's important. There's a laundry list of things that kind of we've come up with, and I'm just going to spit it out for the group to kind of chat about. But, you know, like picking a place that is closer to your family is okay. You can do that. That's okay. If that's the better option for you, pick the place that's closer to your family, or pick the place that's conducive to raising a family if that's what's eventually important to you. And knowing being close to family or just having more resources around might do that, particularly if you and your partner are by yourself, or even if you have no partner and want to do that. Like, what does that look like? Being in a space, this is kind of for me, that's conducive for dating, if you want to do that, right? Like that's going to look different in different spaces, and finding people that look like you or sound like you or talk like you, or more importantly for me, think like me, right? That matters with where I want to live if eventually I'd like to be dating, right? Maybe it means picking a less prestigious place because there's a better dating scene. Like that's also okay. Being in a place that helps you stay well. So I'm thinking about some colleagues that really wanted to be in rural spaces because they needed lots of land, versus colleagues or myself that rather be in city places because they want to go out to like new restaurants, and that's part of their wellness in the day-to-day. Being in a place that's friendly to LGBTQ or folks of color. We are a group of, cisgender white women, all heterosexual here too. And so our experience picking places are definitely attended to that. But I mean, that shit matters too when you're thinking about a place that's prestigious versus a place that is friendly to different populations that are otherwise oppressed in places in America, right? And then being open to jobs that might afford you a different work-life balance, particularly at the expense of like prestige or metrics. So knowing, and that's not like an exhaustive list of things that are okay to weigh heavier than prestige, but is anything for anyone landing of those things that like, hell yeah, that matters to me, or like that was important?
Real quickly, I want to jump in. All of those things are very important. One of the things that I always tell folks who are about to be or currently on the job market is you have worked so damn hard. Be selfish. Be selfish in your decision making moving forward. You've worked way too hard to be miserable with either your position, your coworkers, the place you're living, the sort of position you take, something of that nature. So it's okay to be selfish in that regard. But I do have something that's like slightly triggering to me, which is my own issue with the conversation that's been going on so far, which is this prestige. Less prestigious to who? In a lot of circles, it's way more important and prestigious to work somewhere that you have a direct impact on policy than in an ivory tower. So I just, this concept of prestige, I know we're talking about the alternative academic job market at this point, but I just want to, I guess, encourage anybody who's on the job market to think more about a little bit more broadly about kind of what, like who this matters to, like what this prestige is all about. I know in the PhD program that I come from, they have a thing on their website of initial placements post PhD graduation. And that's all about, who's at the R1, who's at the best think tank, that sort of thing. But there's so much that really matters to evidence-based work that we do, that the only prestigious positions to the rest of the field is not just at university settings. So that's my own, soapbox comment about, like less prestigious to who?
I was going to piggyback on that. I know there was a question in the chat, but I want to piggyback on this because it also gets me, because I internalized this hugely when I went on the job market, thinking like, I just worked my ass off for X amount of years. If I don't get the job, what was it all for? And honestly, when I accepted my current job, I had breakdowns about that when I first started. Like, oh my God, is this what I want? Is this what I just worked for? And I agree. Like, I think it's a super toxic, I don't have a better word for it, toxic part of grad school is this idea that you've worked so hard that the first thing you do out of grad school has to be great, has to be perfect, has to fit you perfectly, has to do great things, has to be whatever this is. I feel like at this point, I know way more people who have graduated PhDs starting a job being like, oh shit, I hate that. I'm going to do something else, you know? And it's like, whether that something else is just a different job in the same market or a totally different change of pace. Like, this was a big crisis for me when I first got out, of like feeling like I wasn't fulfilling what I was expected to be doing, and really kind of finding my own in my job and what that meant in terms of my own version of prestige or my own version of perfect, and letting go of all the pressures from elsewhere. I think that's huge.
Kate, you totally brought it all up for me when you described this, that you initiated this conversation more specifically about prestige. So, I mean, the story I'm going to share is specifically in the academic realm, but I don't think it's exclusive to the academic realm. And so when I went on the job market this most recent time, I mean, the entire purpose of this move was to come to California. It was for no other, I mean, I love being an SDSU. It's offered me all these new opportunities. Were not even on my radar. Great things. However, the whole purpose was to come to the West Coast. Like, there was no other reason. And to be totally honest, the previous decade had been trying to get to the West Coast. I just kept going east instead, because I'll share in a second that place matters the most to me. And I will be transparent about that to anyone, anytime, anywhere. Where I live matters the most. But what Kate said triggered this memory for me when I told one of my final colleagues at my previous university that I was moving, that I was leaving to California. I was terrified about his reaction to me. And his first comment was, "That'll be great for you. You're going to be so close to your family." And I was like, holy shit, that's not what I expected. Like, wow, how empathetic, da, 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 da. Not 1 second later, he says, "You know, that's a step down, don't you?" And I felt a little deflated. I was like, okay, well, no, actually it's not. But like Kate said, a step down for whom? Like, that's not, what you're saying to me doesn't even register. While I was disappointed in the commentary, like it didn't take me that long to be like, okay, yeah, whatever, bye. I'll see you on the West Coast. But I just think it's such a critical commentary from both Kate and Amy to take all of this stuff that we have about prestige and try to filter it out about who does it actually matter to. And if it doesn't matter to you, if it's not going to matter for your day-to-day when you wake up and you make your coffee and you sit down to do your work, like, what do you like the best? Like, what's going to make you feel good about doing the work you're doing? Because you can do great work anywhere, in my opinion. And so whether you're at the X prestigious place or some really great local place, that is also prestigious. And that has all of its own importance that who cares what, I realize it's easier to say than to experience, because we've all experienced it. But once you feel settled in that space, it makes that prestige question be like, why was that so important to me my entire PhD? And so I'm so glad to hear, Amy and Kate, that you're feeling like you've been able to move past that total shitstorm that we just all lived through.
Oh, it's a work in progress, but I'm getting there. I mean, I even introduced myself saying I'm a consultant on a federal program project, which is like, or federal, I probably have fancier words that you're supposed to say to describe what I do. But honestly, what I do on a day-to-day basis, sometimes is meaningful. Sometimes it's managing people, which you could do it's like,
oh no, I feel
you can make anything sound matters what you're doing, Kim. Like, if that actually, oh, am I frozen?
No, you're good now.
Oh, okay.
I mean, I think that yes, I agree. And Jen said in the chat, you know, like your CV doesn't go on your headstone, and I can't wait to repeat that because that's true as shit. I think, you know, for me, I couldn't go to a university setting as a single, you know, unwed, unpartnered person. I can't afford it. I have a lot of student loans. I don't receive financial support from my family. I don't, you know, lots of other personal things going on for me. I could not afford to go potentially make 60 grand, like, or 70 grand, even that, like, it's just not enough to be able to pay my bills. And I needed to go be in a space that I could afford to make more money and where the scale up was so much more. Right. And so that going that direction wasn't even financially soluble for me. Like I would have been in financial ruin trying to do that to appease whom? Like so my mentors would feel really good for a year, and then what? Like the person who pays my bills right now is me. And being someplace that values that, and then I get to do really valuable work otherwise. I think, you know, I think that's so important. Like if you like the work you're doing, that's valuable, and that's all that should matter. Agreed. And you can always teach on the side. And we've had people in our AltAc series, you know, talk about how they adjunct. Kate for a while was adjuncting too. I think the other thing that's really important that Amy brought up is the idea that your first job at the gate does not need to be your dream one. And in fact, it often is not. So like even Kim admits, like, where she was not her dream. She left it for the West Coast, right? Like letting go that the first one needs to be the one that hits it out of the park, and maybe let it be a learning place too. I think is also really important. Jen, did you want to add anything?
So I would say first, to the point of like the prestige conversation, is that I know for myself, the way I define that was going someplace that I felt like was doing work that mattered, was doing quality work, and also in a healthy environment. I had needed to leave a university space. I could not stay in a university space. It just was not healthy for me. And so when it came to looking, that's what it meant for me to go to some place, is like working with people who care about what they're doing, and they're doing it to the best of the ability to, move things forward in a good direction. And I will say, I mean, I am of the opinion of, you never know where you're going to land. You may land in a job right out where you end up being there. And I will share that when I finished the master's degree and started actually at ACE, I anticipated to be there for 2 years or so, because that's all I had ever stayed in a job. I had jumped jobs pretty much every 2 years, and I stayed there 12 years. So who would have ever known that what I thought was going to be a 2-year experience turned into over a decade? And so I would say that, be open to, as opportunities present themselves, if you're interested in moving on at that point, or your circumstances change, you just never know what's going to be an opportunity that you stay in for a while or a short time. And I imagine everyone is going to be changing at some point. Because I think, quite frankly, I think we're in a time where that's just a lot more acceptable and a lot more common, is to be moving between spaces.
Totally. And I think the other thing that brings up too, right, is this conversation of these like hard to handle situations too, is like, you're going to be pressured to take jobs that maybe you don't want. And that it is absolutely also okay to turn down jobs, even when you get offered them, even when your mentors are telling that you should take them, that you need to, like, it's okay to put yourself first, because you're the one who's going to have to do the work, right? Is there anyone that has any commentary about being comfortable turning down jobs?
Yes, Shannon. So Jen actually, I think, shared such a really valuable idea of just like being open for things to come in front of you and then take them, and they may not be what you expect, and then they become something awesome. And that, like, part of that, my story is getting to be on this Zoom with you guys is, so I turned down several jobs to take my postdoc, and my postdoc was not my dream. And the postdoc is not more prestigious than a tenure track, but maybe more prestigious than an AltAc. I'm trying to remember kind of like the specifics about the culture at the time, but yeah, I turned down those other jobs because they were not in places that I wanted to be, even though I was trying to make sure I applied at only places I wanted to live. You're pressured to like apply for anything, like any tenure track job is better than any other job in the world. And so that didn't resonate with me. So I was trying to apply for places that mattered. I was applying for AltAc jobs in cool places like DC and LA and wherever I could. And so when it came time to make those decisions, I was like, no, I'm not going to live in this one place because it just does not sit right with me. Like I will not be, I absolutely know I will not be happy here. And that was enough for me. And I'm thankful I had the privilege to be able to make that decision. But yeah, it's definitely something that takes a lot of, it's not even like confidence, because that's not really the word I'm looking for, but like, I don't know. It's just like a guess, like you like a leap of some kind. But I would definitely advocate for taking that gut feeling over the pressures of prestige, as we've been talking about, any day.
Yeah, I mean, I think we've talked about too, is like just also having like having a good gut feeling and trusting your instinct about places, right? And also knowing, and I think Amy's talked about this before, or separately we've chatted about this, is knowing like, even if, and, even to the point in the chat of like, what about, if you get bored, right? Like you always, whether it's in a university setting or in an AltAc setting, you always keep your eyes on the market, which is why when I tell people like, yes, you're employed, and they're like, stop sending me all of those postings. I'm like, you should probably look at them, because you'll learn what you're worth, what's being valued, how certain skills are being valued, how certain skills are being valued in certain markets, right? We just posted two particular postings that are well suited for this group: a research associate that's between 80 and 100,000, and a senior research associate that's between 100,000 and 135. Like, that's important numbers to know if you're currently employed looking for another job, right? Because then you get to say, I know if I move here, my skill set somewhere is worth between 100 and 135. And so when I'm moving to the next place, that's really the place that I should be thinking about, and coming from, and knowing that just because you're in one space, keeping your eye on the market, keeping up with what's going on is also really, really important. And then you can move at any time.
And I want to answer kind of maybe two of the questions, one in the chat about how soon's too quick to leave if you're not in the job that you really want to be in, and then also about how to address being overeducated potentially for a position that you want to be in. And I say this as someone who has interviewed a lot of people for positions coming in, and I will say there is a red flag if you are a person who has moved jobs about every 2 years, and there's been a lot of those happening, and you kind of haven't sustained very much. There's also understandable reasons, but as an interviewer, I'm not going to ask you why. It's just a red flag, but I think you should be aware of those, because I definitely think, like, to Kate's point, you don't owe your employer. If you are not happy in a situation, or you are not the environment, the work, the whatever, you owe it to yourself to do and make moves that improve your life and put you in a better space. But at the same time, when you're thinking about that next job, I think it's so important to be proactive in explaining, potentially not explaining, but sharing what you learned, right, from where you've worked and how that has developed where you want to go, and how you really feel this position fits you and what your desires are. Because I had a friend who actually, going into an academic position, was questioned, why would you want to come here? Like, you're coming from this place. Why would you want to come to this small university in this, in a small town? Like, how, you're just going to leave us, right? And, she explained, like, it's closer to family. This is the environment I really want to be in, just because I was educated over here, so she had to be very proactive of explaining why this was actually important to her to be, it was a well thought out decision for her in her life. And I think being proactive when you're doing interviews in those discussions about why something may really appeal to you, even though on paper somebody might question why you'd be interested.
Totally. I'd also say, though, the switching jobs often is not always a red flag in all industry spaces. So I'm thinking particularly about consulting. Most people jump ship in consulting pretty quickly, in part because of the way that the projects work. So if you were to enter a space they go back and forth. And so in those spaces, that's probably a more acceptable culture than in other spaces, but important to know what spaces are okay with that and where that kind of is, where that is kind of expected.
I'll say really quickly that in government work at the kind of local, county, and then the state level that I'm in, it's almost kind of seen as a red flag if you stay in the same classification for a long time, because so government is bizarre, and they have the way in my experience, the two jurisdictions I've worked in, there's very specific classifications that people have. You don't just get hired to, do something. There's specific classifications that have specific role responsibilities, specific background requirements, as well as probably some desired stuff that's maybe program or project or agency specific or something of that nature. But it's the classification itself that is skill based. So if you stay in the same classification for too long, you're essentially telling people that your skills aren't developing. Whereas in those government structures, they have built-in processes to reclassify yourself and essentially move up. It's not the same thing necessarily as getting a promotion, although in a way, I guess you can kind of consider it like that. For instance, when my first position at the Multnomah County Department of Community Justice on the research and planning team, I was hired as a data analyst too, so a senior data analyst. But when I started doing the work, I realized that the other folks that were a data analyst too did not have the same background as me. They were not, in fact, doing the same sort of work that I was doing. So I spent, I don't know, 5, 10, maybe 15 hours going through the website on classification and roles in my jurisdiction, found something that was better suited to the actualities of what I did, things regarding project management, not simply just data extraction and then reporting it back. Things like, PI sort of roles, the things that you do in that. And I found a research evaluation analyst senior track. So I had myself reclassified to better reflect what I was actually doing at that time. So I say that in order to kind of jump off of what Shannon said, that in some industries, staying in the same place for too long is considered a red flag. And in my sort of position, unless you're at an executive level, I would say you want to demonstrate progress in that you're improving in what you're doing, you're developing as a professional, you're developing as a researcher, things of that nature. And in that way, your classification, your title, your trajectory should follow and match that. So from my perspective, if I see somebody who's a data analyst 1 for 15 years, that's an exaggeration, for 5 years or something, I'm wondering, why have they not progressed into, being able to do a little bit more than what a data analyst 1 does? So again, that's kind of government, at least in my experience, government specific. But I guess it just goes to the statement that you need to do your homework about the industry that you're interested in. And it's not just in the university oriented jobs where you have to tailor your job market materials for that specific position, and you got to do your homework to know who to talk about and how your work fits into other research agendas that are active. You still need to do a lot of homework for each position that you apply for in a alternative academic yet research intensive market. In all honesty, sometimes it potentially takes a little bit more time in my experience, but it's so incredibly worth it when you find, the work that's meaningful to you. And that's where the prestige lies, is what's the most prestigious and valuable sort of work and positionality to do that work to you specifically. Don't let the academy tell you what it is.
Girl, preach, like where are the little emoji hands that are like, yes. And I think to that end, the way you do that is you ask for information interviews. Like, you can cold call people. I slipped into people's DMs on LinkedIn, ask people for connections, like call people, ask them, but and here's the thing that like sometimes gets my goat a little bit, as somebody now being through 2 rounds of hiring at JSP, and I want people to ask me questions and I want to answer them. But I'm also, working 40 hours, trying to finish a PhD, like trying to also like maybe go to Germany or go to, where did I go? Spain recently, right? Like I'm trying to do other things. I want to help you, but I need you to also be specific, right? Like I get a lot of, especially recently, a lot of emails that are like, hey, Shannon, I saw this. Do you have any tips and tricks? Yeah, girl, I got tons. Which ones you want to hear? Right. Like, and for what? So I think it's, being like, it's totally okay to ask for a call, ask for 30 minutes and have a list of prepared questions. What skills do you guys highlight there? What do you want to see in a cover letter? What is for me, it was, what does creativity look like? How much autonomy in designing things do I have? How much space do I have to try something new in your organization? Those were questions that mattered to me. Don't necessarily have to matter to you, but I had a very long list of specific questions that I asked. And so I wasn't wasting people's time and I was getting the answers that I need. I learned that because somebody told me at NIJ that they were tired of getting emails from people saying, how do I generally get a federal job? Or how do I do this? And they were like, I just need people to come with specific questions. I cannot write you a novel in an email. I don't have the time. And I'm now just going to copy paste all these emails because I'm getting 6 or 7 emails a day about these JSP applications, which is fine. But I'd rather give you 30 minutes of my time and we have a real talk chat about what you need about my position rather than copying and paste an email that I've sent 7 different people,
And to second that, yeah, I did the same thing. I had a conversation both with Brian before before even applying, because it was basically me interviewing. I had a whole list of questions about the work and how it really operates and everything that goes along. I talked to Shannon before, all of that. And it was very helpful because I, quite frankly, it sounds bad, I guess. I didn't want to waste my time if it wasn't, I didn't want to waste other people's time, particularly if it wasn't an opportunity that I really wasn't going to be, dead set to go towards and everything else. And that was amazingly helpful to have those kind of pre-conversations, to get, to ask questions.
Totally. And I think it's okay to ask people for their time. And if they don't have it to give it to you, they're going to let you know, I don't have it to give it to you. And then you just move on to someone else. But I think coming prepared, you can do your industry homework. And that is even true in a university setting, right? Like knowing the difference between universities, what they're looking for matters. Like this is also true in university spaces, but being really thoughtful for yourself so you're not wasting your own time. The other thing I want us to talk about a little bit is, that of course, there's lots of things that matter, but also like money matters. And I think we just need to call it what it is. And I think people are like, it doesn't matter. Well, speak for yourself because y'all, that matters for me. I'm the only one paying my bills. So there's a list of things that I have that I think are important to think about. And maybe you all can talk about what you find or what matter to you generally. But some things that matter, and this of course depends on the industry. Some are negotiable, some are not, but all to know. Your base compensation, bonus potential in some industries, like a consulting industry, a signing bonus that exists. In some spaces, they do tuition credit, particularly, let's say if you're ABD when you get hired on, or continuing education credit. What a 401k matching looks like. So some place that does 3% versus some place that does 100% at 5% or 50% at 5%. Like all of this stuff, starts to add up in those, like how much money you're saving and collecting. What health insurance looks like if you're getting a reimbursement or a FHA or HSA account. If you have PTO, how much that PTO itself is negotiable. I know when I came into JSP, this was last year, I was supposed to go to a wedding in Spain last year. And let's assume that JSP actually had real days off, but we have flexible time off, which was more important to me. I would have said, I'm going to come in with 5 days off because I already have this plan to go to Spain. That's not going to count towards my PTO. That's a thing you can do, right? Like you can negotiate on top of your PTO time. Understanding how much time you accrue over time and negotiating that. Your remote work flexibility, particularly in a post-COVID world, how much is your time in office versus time remote? And if you do have time remote, if there's also travel allowance to come back to the office, if you can get that paid for without paying out of pocket for it. I know some people maybe have gotten a relocation stipend from time to move. Your working hours, right? Like generally speaking, I don't really love working before 10 a.m. That's, kind of how it is. And being able to like pick a place that matters. Equipment negotiation, that's probably a little bit more valuable in a university setting, but also exists in other spaces. A home office allowance, a share workspace allowance. At JSP, I'm like super excited about this, but we get to keep our points on our company credit card for personal use. So that's something that we get to do. And then taxes. And like, I'm going to just call it what it is. I moved from the DC area to Texas in part because it's more affordable living in Dallas. And also I have no income tax. I make $500 more a month by relocating, doing absolutely nothing different. And like that $500 a month afforded me the ability to buy a car and I don't know, go to a nice dinner once a month, right? Like that stuff matters too. Is there anything for anyone where you're like, that definitely was a part of my calculations or decision points?
For me, work from home was a big one, even though this all happened in a COVID world. I wanted to know what it was like post-COVID, because it was hard for me to imagine after PhD life, where you have so much control over your own schedule and day-to-day life. It was challenging for me to think what it would look like to actually have to like have my butt in a chair at an office at a certain time every morning. So work from home and flexibility in that sense was really big for me. Somebody in just said commuting time. That was friggin' huge for me after driving to goddamn George Mason for 6 years and going out on data collection trips, like driving 2 hours to go somewhere just to sit in a place where I could have done that all at home. All big things for me, big time. So yeah, and I honestly, my previous job before my PhD had work from home options. I just don't think I could ever go back to a job where I had to be somewhere 5 days a week, 8 hours a day. So that means every job from here on out is going to have some flexibility for me.
So when I started with Multnomah County, in my initial discussions with them, I knew it was a government job. So there's a specific amount of paid time off for vacation and sick that you accrue for the amount of time that you work. And it's a bummer, but that just kind of is what it is with government work like that. But I talked to them about how a very important part of my identity as a researcher and a scholar is participation in some of the academy kind of scholarly professional societies, as well as the practitioner professional societies. But I mentioned to them, there's a couple conferences that I'm used to going to every year, if not every other year. I want to be able to participate in those. If I'm not presenting my work, I understand I might not have full monetary coverage for them, but I want to be able to go and participate on paid time. I do not want to have to use my vacation time to go to ASC every year. That's unacceptable to me. And they were like, okay, well, you know, we can't offer to pay 100% of your trip expenses every year or that sort of thing, unless you're at the time presenting our work that's approved and whatnot. But, you know, we understand. We understand that there's a couple societies and conferences that are very important to you. We will have that on our radar. So that's something that you can I say that meaning that even if you go into a industry space like government work where I am, that has not the most flexibility with regards to paid time off generally, you can still have conversations with them about what sort of things can be considered work time that are, you know, professional activities. So just throwing that out there as a conversation to have with prospective employers.
For sure, for sure. I also know, you know, I know that Jen in the chat also mentioned, you know, if you're currently adjuncting or teaching or at a university space, let's say like Kim, and wanted to move into an AltAc space, like what does that transition look like? I mean, I think it looks like any other transition, right? That you just have to be thoughtful of repurposing a resume, redoing the work, like about changing the language, everything, whether you're coming from, you're already teaching in a university space or you're coming from a PhD space, all of the skills are pretty much the same. It's just the way that you talk about them. Maybe instead of teaching a classroom, you're like, I'd be really good at the implementation and technical assistance work you guys are doing because I've been developing curriculum over here. I've been sourcing materials over here. I've been building that stuff over here. My audience just happened to be a university student, but my audience can be anyone. Like I know how to translate, and that's the skill that you're talking about. I would also say that at least in the 3 jobs that I applied for in the AltAc space, I was like, oh, here's some peer review articles. They're like, cool, cool, cool. Give us a translational piece. And so at least having at least a translational piece to be able to offer as like, this is what I do know how to actually write for a policy market or a lay audience. Here's an example of that. Having that at the ready and trying to be the first author in some cases, like people know that, you know, this is a group effort when you're writing translational pieces and it is what it is. But if at possible, kind of being a first author on something or a second author, or at least being able to communicate what part of your thinking was in this lay piece would probably also be really critical from you moving from a university space to an AltAc space.
Hey, Shannon,
a couple other things that I want to, yeah, go ahead.
I was just
please
going
go ahead.
to say 2 things, what you just said. One is, and I had not thought about this in this way until you just said this, is that for people that want to go into an AltAc space, whether you're coming from a PhD program or you're sitting in a university setting, I think adding translational pieces, turning things that would traditionally be peer-reviewed work into translational work is a critical thing to do. So whether that's like a report you're working on for a big grant, suggest to your advisor that you distill something into a really translational piece that can go on your resume. I think that's such great advice. And I think we should just do that anyway, as an aside. The other thing that I wanted to just like say or be really excited about what you talked about is that the knowing, and Jen alluded to this earlier, knowing the culture you're going into and kind of what that looks like, maybe thinking ahead about having prepared answers for the types of people that might want to know, why do you want to work at this place? Or, the feeling of being overqualified, like, well, why are you coming here? And being able to articulate, you know, the things that you bring to the table is really important. And that was true for me going from one university space to another. But I think the same is true if I were to move to the AltAc space. I got to really think about how I'm going to talk about myself. So I just wanted to reiterate that particular point.
Totally.
Oh,
Go ahead. Yeah, go ahead.
I was
Amy.
going to add a quick note about something else you can negotiate when you accept an AltAc job. And I guess, well, no, probably not academic job actually, is I negotiated finishing my dissertation as part of accepting my job. I accepted my job in January, knowing I had already scheduled my defense for April and how much work I was going to have to do from January to April to be actually ready to defend. But for me, and this, this could translate to different types of jobs, but because I was on a federal contract, I needed to get a federal background check. So I needed to be on staff for my company to be able to do all of that. But I wasn't able to actually do the work that I was hired to do until that clearance went through. So I basically negotiated until the clearance goes through, I'll be part-time. I'll work 8 hours, 10 hours, whatever it was. We came to a number that we all agreed on. They wanted a certain number because they were hiring me and wanted help. I wanted a certain number to ensure that I would have time and space to finish my dissertation. And so I worked part-time for the first 3 months. It was also a great fire under my ass to get that dissertation done, knowing that if at any point my federal background check went through, I had to go full-time. So that's something too, especially for people who are nearing the end and are trying to balance finding a job and finishing and not wanting to finish without a job because then what are you going to do? Or not wanting to accept a job too early because you want to have space for your dissertation. Talk about that to your potential employer and see if they're open to that. I also know companies I used to work at, when if your dissertation work related to something that benefited them as well. I know some people who have gone to finish their dissertation on company time because the company was basically like, cool, then we expect you will bring work in similar like that to us next, and so those are things you should also think about, especially if you're kind of in that overlap period where you're close to finishing, but not quite, and can't give up one before the other. So
quickly, I actually did the same thing with teaching. I had the summer after I finished my PhD, I was teaching a couple master's level stats classes. I took my job, my first post PhD position, telling them, I still have a teaching contract for 2 summer semesters. I cannot work full time until whatever it was, August 25th, 2018 or something of that nature. I think I gave myself actually a week. I padded it a week after my course ended and I needed to have my grades in. And I told them I can only work, I think it was 15 to 20 hours a week until then. So, there's other reasons that you can do that for as well. If you have additional commitments, maybe potentially a research contract through an RA-ship or something of that nature, if we're teaching through the summer, just be transparent with people. There's a reason that you're getting interviews. There's a reason that you're getting an offer and they want you at that point. So just, kind of tell them, not in an obnoxious way, but tell them what you need in order to be successful with finishing what you're doing and then starting afresh with something new.
Totally. And I think one thing that's important to know is if you're getting an offer, they want you to be there. And also they don't want to waste their own time redoing the process. So their people are far more likely to work with you in lots of different ways. I want to be thoughtful of time. And if you all have the ability to stay a little bit longer, you can. And folks in the audience, this is recorded. So if you can't continue to stay, it'll be posted on the website. But some other things that I think are really important that need to be said, even if we don't unpack them, is even in an academic job, something is really important is that if you come off, particularly if you don't time it correctly, if you come off of a GRA position, it's possible, particularly starting with a university position, that you are going to have a significant opening in your pay. I saw this on Twitter the other day and I saved it so I could talk about it. A professor was talking about how her house was in shambles and basically didn't have a dining room table, but she was teaching at an R1 university, right? She was a professor, but her life was in shambles because she had gone 2 months without a paycheck. So that shit matters. So just be prepared, even if you're going into a university setting, that you ask questions about when does the pay kick in? What does that look like? Because you could potentially, particularly if you're unwed, unpartnered, or unfinancially supported, you could be without a paycheck for quite some time. And so being thoughtful. Another one that I saw on Twitter, and I know Kim and I were talking about, is how if you take postdoc positions, university or otherwise, you could potentially be moving someplace new, particularly if you're unwed, unpartnered, by yourself without anybody, and not receiving the same kind of social support that a professor does or a grad student does, and kind of being prepared a little bit for, I'm going to use the term loneliness, but I don't want to oversubscribe it, but potentially kind of being on an island as part of that process. I don't think people are talking about the loneliness that might exist in postdoc positions, particularly one-year positions. And like, I think that shit is real. The other thing that I want to say out loud, because we talked about this earlier today, is if you're somebody who has an arrest record or a conviction record, that shit obviously matters for navigating the market, and your mentor might not be very good at helping you and doesn't see the blind spots about how your orbit is holding on to that stuff. And every time you're thinking about applying for a job, you're thinking about a box you have to check or a background check, particularly for things. And you're like, am I going to clear it? Am I going to clear it? Is this going to be a problem? How fucking embarrassed am I going to be if this comes out and people don't know? I want to acknowledge that that is real. I have an arrest record. I don't have a conviction record, but I have an arrest record. And that's been a really stigmatizing journey for me, to move through space and think about that. And so if that's something that you're experiencing, know that is hard. And it's not, people are not good at it and they avoid the conversation and they don't want to say the right things. And I think that's important that but in not talking about it, we're not doing a service for folks who have this in their orbit and that they're sitting with and grappling with. I want to just those are kind of other button issues that I've been thinking about. For anyone else on the panel, is there anything else that you're like now is the time to air out some shitty grievances? I know we're close to time, but is there anything else that you guys have that's been sitting on your soapbox?
I was going to say, keep in touch with your peers, like not only for the support, like what Shannon was saying, if you end up moving somewhere for a postdoc and like struggle to figure out like what that means for you, like remember that there are other people who live this experience with you and may not be in the exact same place or time or space with it, but they'll understand. I also think now, especially that I have friends who are also done and in good jobs and out there doing work, you never know what your friend's work might lead you to. Like I had lunch with a friend I hadn't seen from my same PhD program. And she was like, oh, I meant to ask you, do you know anything about, secondary murder charges for people who give drugs as drug dealers and they end up dying? My work wants to fund that. And would you want grant money around that? Like, would you ever apply for something like that? And opportunities like that could come up anywhere. And she's just a friend of mine who like knows what I'm interested in and realized something she's doing at work could be of interest to me, both in my wheelhouse of what I'm interested in, but also professionally, like something that I could reach out and apply for and try to get a grant for. So it's been big for me too, to try to keep in touch with people. It's easy to lose track of friends as you move through life and start new jobs or move places. Like, Shannon and Jen and Kim are all good examples of this for me. All four of us at one time worked in the same office, and now all four of us are in 4 different places. And I think it matters. It matters to keep those connections, both for your own peace of mind and mental health, but also professionally to like see what else is out there and like keep track of other opportunities for you.
I love that, Amy. I think you're spot on with especially keeping it connected. Because yeah, so much has happened and so many things. Like Shannon brings up projects all the time, and we have this wish list that someday will be covered. But so something that keeps coming up for me about this entire conversation about shit that we have to talk about being on the market is, and I don't have a great way to like articulate it, I think, but is just knowing your worth. So I don't think I realized this until I went to a job interview, and they told me up front, this job only pays $60,000 a year. And it was hard to keep like a really cool face on it. And not that, I mean, in some places, 60,000 is okay, I get, as like living wage, I guess, but not in this place, and not, not for like his compensation for what I was going to have to do as a worker. So that was the first time I was like, oh, wait a minute, I'm worth more than that. Like my value, the time I put into that is worth more. And I think I didn't get that because in grad school, the attention is always like, oh, thank you for this gift of a very low paying job to do research on your grant. And I will do it for as long as you want me to, sometimes for no pay, because that's just the realm we live in. And we keep doing it. And there is so much work we do in kind because we're all passionate about our topics. But at the end of the day, like Shannon went through, all of those things on her list of stuff you should know about, like taxes and benefits, though I feel so like not an adult because I did not do my due diligence. And now I pay out the tail in taxes because I live in a place that has really high taxes. And I can't change that because I really want to live here, but I didn't know it. And I guess knowing it would have softened the blow. And I would have prepared for those couple months I didn't have a salary. And I would have prepared for, like, I just would have known a little bit more about my world. And it's really hard to do when you're working on a PhD because this thing is hard and our brains are just fully invested in it. And especially if you're just finishing your dissertation, like you don't want to think about stuff anymore, especially hard, like life things. So those topics keep coming up for me every time I'm thinking about this whole idea of, the shit we don't say out loud. And so I'm really glad that we're saying it out loud right now. But I would reiterate, like, you are worth a lot more than what some places are willing to pay you. And so demand it, ask for it, because they want you. And we're living in a culture right now where I think workplaces are becoming precarious about their staff. And so they're going to have to start altering their pay scales. And I think that's a positive for workers. So that's my 2 cents on that, Shannon.
My final statement, I guess, will be that, well, first of all of this has been amazing. All of these comments are phenomenal. I think it's really important to provide a space to share these observations, provide support and just kind of camaraderie around, doing really, really good work in a non-university setting, but still having it be academic, rigorous, research intensive, all of that sort of stuff. I already went on my high horse about prestige, so I'm not going to go back there. But what I do want to say is, while it sounds kind of like touchy-feely or whatever, having good vibes about a position and the work that they do, the mission, vision, values, colleagues are important if you're a people person, which I'm a numbers person, not a people person. So I love my work from home. Like the feeling you get from the space, from what you're going to be doing, from every sort of interaction that you have with people, like there's something to be said for the intuition and for making sure that you're comfortable with something. And, that's okay and very good to think about. And again, to my initial before I even mentioned the prestige stuff, it's good to be okay to be selfish about all of these concerns. These concerns matter. A lot of people live to work, but it is totally 100% okay to work only to live and to have that be your priority, your non-work time. Your work time is very important as well. And I work my dream job and I love that. But the stuff that I don't do at work is just as important. And if I was in a position that didn't allow for the type of lifestyle that I wanted to live in the place I want to live, I would be very unhappy and miserable. So those vibes, that having alignment with mission, vision, values, feeling just that feel good feeling about, working somewhere is really important.
And I will absolutely second that, because I don't care how much more money would have been offered. It was the feeling of, I'm going to work with people that I feel good about working with, right? And having those conversations meant a lot, as much, actually more than what the price tag was on the job. Not to mention also the flexibility, because as agreeing with Amy, like I can't imagine not having the flexibility at this point in my life now to work from wherever I wish to work. And, I can spend 3 weeks someplace and not be at home and still not have to take time off, right? To get that balance. So I think those things is even more important. So definitely pay attention to them and follow your instinct on those things.
I just want to echo Kate's comment about thinking about life outside of work, because that did not come to me when I was thinking about job interviews. You get so caught up in PhD world and you've lost so many hobbies over the years that you don't even realize that you don't do a lot outside of life, outside of work. And I was on the phone with my mom over the weekend talking to her about like what I'm up to, what my life is like. And she was like, "It sounds so nice, Amy. It sounds like you really have a life again." Like I didn't talk about grad school or my dissertation or even work. Like maybe I gave her a quick update, but to really think about what you want to be able to spend your time outside of work doing again, because that's, for me, that was a huge thing I lost in grad school. And it was a transition for me to refine that again when I started working and not having grad school on top of it.
Totally. I think that is, the second month on the job at JSP, I was working from Morocco, and like the call to prayer is going on behind me, and like a meeting with Brian. He's like, "What is that?" I'm like, "Oh, it's just the call to prayer." He's like, "Where are you?" Right. And like that, it was totally fine that my answer was Morocco. Right. Like that matters to me. And so in just wrapping up here, I'm so thankful for people to come, for everyone for joining us, and for the panelists for talking about their experiences. I think that we're, particularly this group of women, are a group of women who just like are okay with being honest and earnest. And I'm so thankful to be in their orbit of people who are so about being real and helping other people not have to be complicated by the things that we've experienced, or to learn from the great thing, or to replicate the things that went well for us for other people. And I think these women on this panel are great. And so to reach out to anyone on the panel for help. I think in part of, this kind of started as Kate and I like somewhat commiserating about our experiences and different tracks, and then creating a space for all of us. So we'd be like, let's make sure that other people don't have to deal with this bullshit. And really like, that's kind of what this is. And so for me, while I've had exceptional mentors who have always said, how can we help you and what can we do? I've also had an experience that was very isolating, that I had to do by myself, that people didn't know how to help me navigate, that when I got jobs, mentors didn't call me back to congratulate me. Like all of that stuff still happened to me inside of a space that was relatively good. And so knowing that, like, if for nothing else, if you're like, oh shit, everything they said I already knew, like also know that like this is also a place of people who have experienced similar things of feeling like the black sheep, and that we are here to say like that shit is not okay. But we're going to be a part of changing a dynamic and removing some of the toxicity that just doesn't need to exist wherever you want to go work, because wherever you want to go is where you should go. And I think that's kind of the bottom line. So with that, I super appreciate everyone coming. If anybody in the audience has any other questions, comments, or concerns, please feel free to put them in the chat, or to reach out to any one of us directly. And then with that, I really thank everyone for joining us.
Thanks, Shannon, for hosting this.
Yeah.
Thank you, everyone.
Yes, thank you.
All right. I hope you guys have a good rest of your Thursday. Bye.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Being so real, guys.